You know, I was born during the Second World War, and it was during the time when the Arab nations came into existence, and Lebanon was an Arab country. We were Lebanese by nationality, but Arabs. And I grew up in an Arab world that was trying to define itself, especially during the time of Nasser of Egypt. And yes, I am Lebanese, but I am Arab at the same time. My father's family comes from Mount Lebanon, and he came to Beirut to study originally at the American University of Beirut. And when he graduated, he started he first had a job at the American University, and then he quit and established a food processing factory and stayed in Beirut. My mother's family actually, my mother was born in Beirut. Her family moved from Tripoli. Her father came from Tripoli to the American University of Beirut to teach. He was a professor of Arabic. And she was born in Beirut. And that's where they met, in Beirut. I would say my father was dapper. He had to be impeccably dressed. He always wore suits. He never wore anything, you know, casual at all. Especially in those days, nobody did. You know, for us children, he was overpowering. I remember when he once was coming back from England just after the First World War, and my mother took us to the airport to meet him so that we would see a plane for the first time. And when we got back, one of my cousins, she asked how the plane looked like, how big it was. And he said, as big as Papa. You know, he was so tall and big that he thought the plane was as big as he was. My mother was always moving around. That's the image we all had of her, because she couldn't sit still. And she had a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety sometimes manifested itself in a lot of movement. She was a principal of a school, a headmistress, as they say now, of a girls' school. It was a national secular girls' school in Beirut. It was one of its kind. She went to that school as a child, and after she graduated and went to university in the United States, she came back, taught for 1 year, and then she was offered the position of headmistress and was headmistress of that school for 40 years. She didn't see herself as an ambitious person, interestingly enough, but she was, you know. She wanted that to be the headmistress. They offered it to her, she took it. She had other choices in life, but she felt that was her mission and took that job. She took it seriously, and whatever she did and wanted, she fought for wholeheartedly, and that's where her ambitions showed. As a child, when I was a little child, I was attached to her, but I never saw her enough. And I remember always complaining that I wanted to go with her, and they would say to me, she has work now to do. And so in a way, I wanted a mother to be with me all the time like all the other kids, but she wasn't. And when I grew older, the relationship became tense, like most relationships with mothers and daughters. One of the things that for me were most attractive about him, besides his general looks, were his hands. You always saw his hands. He had very expressive hands. And later on, people commented on that, because when he spoke on television, he always you know, used his hands. People knew him as a public figure, and as a public figure, it was a different personality. But when I met him, he was very gregarious, very open, curious. it stayed with him. He always asked questions. He always showed interest in people, even people whom he met fleetingly. When he talked to people, and that was a wonderful quality he had. It was as if you were the most important person in his life, and he respected people that way. He also, could had a temper. I mean, he was moody, and that you didn't see in public. But when I got to know him more and intimately and so on, you would see that there was a sadness to him that didn't appear in public. He wasn't pessimistic, but maybe melancholic about certain things. He used to feel depressed from time to time, partly because he had a lot of energy, and that energy never stopped. Partly because he always felt he wasn't good enough. And this is apparently true of many people who are big achievers, and they always think that they're not good enough, they haven't done. And maybe it was in his upbringing, I don't know, that they made him feel that way. I used to be extremely impressed by how hard he worked, although it didn't appear that he was exerting a lot of effort, but he did. He was extremely disciplined, and I envied that because I am not at all disciplined. I needed a job in a company to be able to be disciplined. If I'm left to my own devices, I waste my time. He had gone every summer. In August, he would go and do a general checkup. This was part of his discipline too, like I would never go unless somebody pushed me, but he would do it religiously. And he said to me, before I left Sweden, call the doctor and ask him about the results. And I thought, strange, why is he worried about his results? But I thought maybe he's becoming anxious. He was 55 years old at the time. So I called the doctor and I said, Edward called me from London. He wants to know the results of his blood tests, his tests. I didn't specify. Then he said, are you sitting down? I said, no. He said, go sit down. And he said, you don't have to tell him, but his white count is very high, and we think he has something called CLL. And he said it, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And I sat down dumbfounded, basically. Here we had 2 kids. My son had just gone to college. My daughter was still in high school. He was very young. 55 at that time was very young, for me at least. And I didn't know what to say. And then I kept saying, should I call him? Should I not call him? Should I call him? Should I? So then I said, I won't call. He's so anxious, he'll call me back. He did call back. What did he tell you? And then I said, well, I'm going to tell you, although he told me not to tell you, and you call him. And he said, you have this, but this is something very simple, this is controllable, and it's not life-threatening. And I could see he was agitated, but I felt I had to be honest with him, because playing games was not, although Edward was not somebody who liked reality very much. I grew up in a family where if there was something serious, they just, hit you with it. They said it right away. So for me, I was used to that. Oh, it changed our lives completely. I mean, first, for him to deal with it was a big deal. For us to deal with it was a big deal. my daughter reacted very strongly. She wanted to be the sick one, not him, so she became anorexic. In the beginning, both he and I sort of were in denial that it's nothing serious and so on and so forth. But I was frightened. He was frightened. I tried not to show him that I was frightened. He tried to show me that he was not frightened. It was hard. He spent the last 12 years of his life, 10 years of his life, having treatment 3-4 times a year, if not more. And yeah, you live with illness, but it's not easy. So my mother realized in 1958, after this mini civil war, which lasted 4 or 5 months, that this is the break with the past. Life is not going to be the same from now on. And she decided to write her memoir for us, her children, and for her students, to tell us about the world that she grew up in and how beautiful it was, although there were hardships. During the Civil War, listening to the news, she realized that the West does not know this, our side of the Palestine tragedy and our situation. So she proceeded to write it in English for a Western audience. And she finished it in 1979. My husband was visiting Lebanon in March of that year. She gave him the manuscript and she said, "Find me a publisher in the United States." And Edward took the manuscript and he read it on the plane. And when he arrived, he said, "It needs a lot of editing, and this manuscript can be done only if you work on it." At that time, my kids were young. I was overwhelmed with trying to manage my household and wanted very much to work and wasn't interested in doing this. I threw it in the drawer for many years. Then at some point, I remembered it. I showed it to a person who had written something about women. She thought it was a wonderful story. A few years later, Bush decides to go to attack Iraq in 2002, in the summer of 2002. He announces this, and a couple of days later, Edward and I went to a book party for somebody the publisher had, and his publisher had. And I walk in, and this young woman who teaches creative writing was there, and she looked at me and she said, "Now you must publish your mother's book." And I give her credit to that, because she didn't stop, she continued during, she said, "Your mother talks about Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq. And this is crucial." And then something very strange happened. I tried to get the first edition of the book, and nobody of my relatives had it. Because of the civil war in Lebanon, the copies that were at the school, were destroyed when the school was, bombed and vandalized. In April of that year, a distant relative of a relative of mine was in Iraq, and he had a day off, and he was walking on the famous Mutanabbi Street where all the booksellers are. And he saw this book, and he opened it, and he noticed it was written by my mother and dedicated to her sister, and he realized right away that this was his relative's aunt. So he bought the book and brought it to her. And when this happened, I felt, maybe it is fated that I should publish it. So we began to work on it slowly, and a few months later, Edward passed away. And when he passed away, I just shelved it for a while. When I retired in 2004, and I sorted out a few things, I felt maybe Edward was right. I should look at this now, and this will give me something constructive to do. I thought later on, after we began working on it, why did I, when Edward was alive, I was toying with the idea of publishing it. And when he encouraged me, I said, oh, this is a good idea. And I was thinking in terms of something for me to do. But then when he died and I didn't do anything about it, was it because I lost my husband and I was lost? Or was it because I needed to reconcile myself, to bring her back to life and rethink our relationship and my life with her? Perhaps in some ways I needed her, and I brought her back to life.